up, guys? So I'm not only a convert to Orthodox Judaism, I'm also a proud Anglo-Saxon. I'm pretty sure that the majority of my DNA is Anglo-Saxon, and yeah, I've got some Irish in me, but I'm ashamed of it. I'm a descendant of Michael Dyer. He was a 19th century Irish rebel who was escaped from British prisons 3 times, and as a result was sent on transport to Australia, and then created all sorts of havoc. I mean, that's not me. I'm a lover of peace. I'm 1/16 Chinese, but I'm also ashamed of that. So in political cultural terms, I primarily identify with the majority of my DNA that's Anglo-Saxon. And Anglos are awesome. Number one, they're the most honest people in business you can ever hope to deal with as a group. There's simply no other group that is consistently as honest in business as Anglo-Saxon. They're more honest than Mormons. They're even a little more honest than German Americans. German Americans come close, including Jewish German Americans. They tend to be very ethical in the way they conduct their business. They tend to be very good citizens. Japanese Americans come close to touching the very high standard that Anglo-Saxons set for business ethics. So the more centuries Jews spend in the West, the more they assimilate to Western norms, Western ways of doing business, Western mores in citizenship. And as opposed to Jews who live for 100 years in Eastern Europe, they tend to be much more radical in their politics and more likely to some anti-gentile tendencies, just as non-Jews from Eastern Europe are more likely to have anti-Jewish tendencies than non-Jews from Western Europe. Come on, mate, bloody hell, I'm trying to teach Torah here. Bloody hell, why won't the goyim get out of my way? I'm bloody streaming on YouTube, and all these guys, I bet many of them are illegal, are gumming up my roadways. I'm trying to show humanity a better way. You better slow down there, mate. Bloody hell. What's a Jew got to do to turn right around here? Okay, mate, you better not go into the crosswalk. Okay, now I'm on easy. Oh, bloody hell. Oh, what's a Jew got to do to turn left around here? This is a bloody nightmare. This is worse than Auschwitz. Come on, let's get going. Okay, anyway. So, Anglos, very high business ethics. They tend to be excellent citizens in terms of they do their jury duty. They take the responsibility to fight in the military. Bloody guys just walking across the street when a Torah Jew's trying to abide by the law and get home to prepare for his show. It's a travesty. So Anglos tend to be good citizens. They take the oath of loyalty seriously. They take oaths seriously. Like when an Anglo gives his word, it really means something. The oath of citizenship, when an Anglo takes it, he takes it seriously. When non-Anglos take it, it's frequently just a joke. It's a bad joke. They just mumble the words, but it means nothing. You see these photos of citizenship ceremonies these days for non-Anglos, and they're just here for the gibs. Gives me this, gives me that. That's not the true meaning of citizenship, guys. Excuse me if I'm shouting, that's a very non-Anglo thing to do. So James Flynn, the psychologist and the IQ expert who really likes environmental answers, he was a visiting professor for a year, I think in Virginia. He's a New Zealand native, but he was in something like Virginia for a year. And so there were 3 families on his cul-de-sac. Come on, I'm patient, just go ahead, take your time, guys. I don't mind waiting while you cross the street. Okay, so there were 3 families on his cul-de-sac: Chinese American, Jewish American, and African American. And every night after dinner, the Jewish family would scream at each other, and then the kids would settle down and do their homework. Every night after dinner, the Chinese kids would just quietly settle down to do their homework. And every night after dinner, the African American family played basketball. Come on. Come on. Bloody hell. What's the Jew got to do to turn right around here? This is worse than the Chomitsky pogroms in 18th century Poland. Okay, so the Anglo Way. So, tend to be honest in business, good citizens. They create the most countries with the lowest levels of corruption. Anglos don't like corruption. High trust societies. Why do they have high trust societies? Because they believe in universal morality. In the Anglo worldview, there's no such thing as it's okay to cheat outgroups. Right? Some do it. Obviously, Anglos are human, but Anglos don't boast about how, oh, you know, I really rooked that Jew or I really, you know, cheated the government in my taxes. They don't boast about this kind of cheating. While most tribal groups, they will boast about ripping off outsiders. German Jews won't participate in this sort of thing. English Jews, by and large, will not boast about, you know, ripping off outgroups. Jews that have lived in America for 3 generations, they're not going to boast about, generally speaking, ripping off outsiders. Japanese Americans won't, but often Chinese Americans, Vietnamese Americans will take pride in how much they've been able to, you know, rip off outgroups and cheat the system and bilk the government and run frauds, and that's not the Anglo way. So another awesome thing about Anglos is they don't live through their kids. Like most ethnic groups, the parents like live through their children. Like my son the doctor, my son the professor, my son the dentist, my son the CEO, my son the entrepreneur, my son the YouTube streamer. Okay? Anglos don't live through their kids. Like, I grew up with the expectation that once I turned 18, I was on my own to make my own way in the world. And even before that, like at age 6, 7, I would leave home after brekkie and I'd go out into the bushy and I'd cut down, you know, trees with my tomahawk and play Indian cowboys and Indian games and like massacre insects. And then I'd come home, I'd have a hearty lunch, and back I'd go into the outback. You know, I'd chase aborigines, the kangaroos, and the red belly, and run wild in the bush. That was life at Avondale College, Anglo community. You never see were lying dead, drunk in the gutter. My brother from like age 10, 11, he'd hitchhike into Bathurst to watch, you know, the Bathurst 500. And he'd leave in the morning, he'd come home after dark, and parents say, "Did you have a nice day, son?" "Oh, yes, Dad, I went over to Bill's." "Oh, that's great. Bill's a top bloke." Okay, that was my upbringing. When, oh, bloody hell, what's a Jew got to do to get through this intersection? So when we stayed in Baltimore for a month, in 1980, and I'd take off. I was 14. I'd take off in the morning and I'd just go and walk about. And Baltimore is like amazing. And I'd just go and walk about and just walk all around and come back, and I'd take take a few bucks and I'd buy myself some drinks and some ice cream and some candy, and I'd just walk and walk and walk and walk for miles. And then like come dark, I'd come home. It'd be 9 o'clock at night, and oh, Luke, how are you? What'd you do all day? Oh, I went to the library. And then I went for a little bit of a walk. Oh, that's good. That's good. And Anglos are hands off, and so yeah, there are Anglo kids who kind of look at Jews and go, "Wow, Jews love their kids. Wouldn't it be amazing to to grow up in a culture that loves its children?" But the Anglos love their children too. They're just not as tightly. It's not as tight. It's not as intense. It's not as emotionally volatile as Jewish families are much more emotionally expressive than Anglo-Saxon families. I never yelled at my parents once in my upbringing. Never once yelled at my parents. And that's true for most Anglo-Saxons. Most Anglo-Saxons go through their whole life without ever yelling at their parents. And I don't think my parents ever yelled at me. I don't think my parents ever yelled at me, not once. I don't think any of my teachers yelled at me. I mean, they'd hit me with canes and stuff like that when I was in Australia, but there's not a whole lot of yelling in Anglo-Saxon life. It's there's a great stress placed on being courteous, being polite, being considerate, and writing thank you notes. That's why Anglo-Saxons don't go to orgies, because there are too many thank you notes to write. So Anglo-Saxons were never cut out to dominate the porn industry. They just don't have the right stuff. So it just never occurred to me that once I turned 18, that my parents, my family, my relatives would pay for anything. I always expected when I turned 18, I would get a job, I'd work my way through college. It never occurred to me that my family would pay for college or my parents would pay for college. It didn't even occur to me. And I mean, maybe Anglos have gotten soft and flabby. So I'm sure there are many Anglo families that do pay for their kids' college, but never occurred to me, bloody hell, what's a Jew got to do to get through a red light around here? So my parents never once asked to see my homework. Never once. They would see my grades, and they would usually be quite disappointed and annoyed and give me punishments because I was always getting bad grades, and they'd go to parent-teacher conferences and they'd hear that I was disruptive, that I wasn't interested in putting much effort in, that I was more interested in being the class clown, and they'd be hurt and disappointed. But they never once asked to review my homework. I mean, that's just inconceivable in my Anglo-Saxon upbringing. So with a lot of my mates, their parents weren't looking at their homework, and to prepare for the SAT, that's just not sporting. It's just not cricket from an Anglo-Saxon perspective. I know a lot of Asian kids, they're doing this massive prep work for the SAT or the GRE and stuff like this. It's just not the Anglo thing to do. You don't prep for these important examinations. You just go there and you do your best, and if you get a gentleman C, you get a gentleman C, and that's fine. For Asian kids and for Jewish kids, you get an A, and if you have to cheat to get an A, it's better to cheat and get an A than to be honest and get a C. That's the mentality for tribes, Chinese kids and Japanese kids and Korean kids and many Jewish kids. That's kind of what they're raised with. Life is war. You got to be prepared to do whatever it takes, and it's either tacit or explicit acceptance of cheating, manipulating the system, doing all these things that are just frowned on in Anglo life. So there's no stress on getting into a major university growing up Anglo, okay? If I had gone to Sacramento State, UC Davis, or UCLA, or Harvard, it wouldn't have affected my parents' happiness levels like one bit. Okay? If I had majored in business at Sacramento State, or if I had majored in Latin at Harvard, or economics at UCLA, it didn't affect my parents' happiness levels. My parents' happiness was not dependent on where I went to college, where I went to university. They never lived through me. It's not like in December of 1999, I was Hustler Magazine's Asshole of the Month, and my parents just started cavilling. I was like, oh yeah, our son, he's Asshole of the Month. You know, that's so awesome. Let's show everyone at church. I mean, that's not the Anglo-Saxon way. So people would say, oh, you know, I saw Luke on 60 Minutes, or I saw Luke on Entertainment Tonight, and, you know, there'd be a shrug and embarrassment, but Anglo-Saxon parents don't live through their kids. So it's quite different in Jewish life. There's this like really intense, emotionally volatile bond down through the generations, and if the parents need help sending the kids to the right school, the grandparents and the uncles and, you know, the cousins, like everyone pitches in to make sure that the kids get the right education. And then there's a lot of pressure to get into an elite university. And I mean, a Jewish kid who ends up going to Cal State Northridge, I mean, everybody laughs at you. Like, you go to Cal State Northridge if you're Jewish, it's like driving a Lexus. Everybody laughs at you. You try to drive up to shore in a Volvo, it's like you're a loser. Okay, don't be a loser, be a winner. Go to Harvard. Or at the very least, UCLA, Berkeley, Stanford, University of Chicago. And there's like a lot more pressure to succeed. There's a lot more, I notice, parental involvement. I see this like really, like just the close relationship between parents and kids in Jewish life. So, I mean, they're talking about their kids' sex life and how they're just a broken condom away from having Chinese grandchildren, because the son keeps banging these homely, eager Chinese chicks, and how they're, you know, always finding condoms in the trash, and, you know, complaining the son's just using, you know, his room at home, you know, as a brothel, but like, you know, and there's like, you know, very volatile emotions all expressed about it. It's not the way Anglo-Saxons roll. Like when an Anglo-Saxon kid goes out on a date or before the prom, you know, his parents don't tell him, you know, don't forget your condom. Okay, that's not how Anglo-Saxons talk. They're not, parents don't usually quiz their kids about their sex life. I mean, MCT, you may love your Volvo, but all the other Jews are laughing at you, bro. They regard you as a loser. I mean, I admire that you have like an inner sense of self-esteem, so that even though all the other Jews are laughing at you, you don't let that get to you. But you probably have a lot of gentile genes. Like maybe your biological father was the mailman. So, I mean, you go to synagogue, and if you're any kind of a Jewish woman, like a Persian American Jewish synagogue, now you're dropping your $5,000, I don't know, Gucci purse or whatever. If you don't have a $5,000 purse, you're a loser. That's not how it is in Anglo life. It's not how it is in traditional Orthodox life either, in Judaism. But in Jewish life, there's a lot more emphasis on grades. There's a lot more emphasis on getting into an elite college. And in Jewish life, everybody knows the best doctor. Like, my cardiologist is the best cardiologist. My fungus doctor, you know, is the best fungus doctor. My dentist is like a special, like the world's leading authority on the, you know, third upper molar. My radiologist went to Harvard. Like, everyone in Jewish life has the best doctor. You don't see that in Anglo life. People don't go around saying, you know, my you know, ENT, my ear, nose and throat doctor is the best. He went to the University of Woolloomooloo. Or they don't go, oh, my radiologist published some poetry in the New Yorker. So in Anglo life, there's probably more emphasis on athletics and on physical, having an ability to deal with the physical world. You go camping. There's not a whole lot of camping in Jewish life. In Jewish life, you know, roughing it is a 3-star hotel. That's roughing it. That's in Jewish life. You're always exploring the great indoors. So you go to a Jewish conference, a big weekend Jewish conference. You do not leave the hotel for 4 days. Okay, that's a Jewish conference. You go to like some Anglo retreat. It's like it's outside. You know, they're like 20-mile hikes. You play cricket. You play rugby. You know, you build a canoe. You know, you may discuss a little Shakespeare. You go to church on Sundays. But it doesn't have the intense, generally speaking, academic, you know, elite focus of Jewish life. And so Jewish parents seem to invest a lot more in their kids than Anglo parents, and they seem to be a lot more emotionally involved. There's a lot more yelling. There's a lot more intensity. I kind of like it. Like, I like Jewish life. I like the emotional intensity. I love the intense love. I love like the wide open emotions. I mean, you can laugh about things you can't laugh about in Anglo life. I mean, there was this Orthodox Jewish kid. He had his bar mitzvah, and I think his parents gave him a copy of Penthouse magazine and a tub of Vaseline. Okay, Anglo-Saxon parents don't give their boys Penthouse magazine and a tub of Vaseline, you know, when the boys turn 13. So I dig the intensity of Jewish life, but I also respect kind of the cool, kind of more cool approach of the Anglo-Saxons, the more disinterested, the parents who aren't you know, up in all their kids' lives, you know, intensely, and making demands and bribing. You know, there are intimations of this in Anglo-Saxon life. I remember I was at the Glacier View conference in 1980, and my father was getting kicked out of the Seventh-day Adventist church, and I dived into the pool, and this, you know, this church administrator or academic said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm the son of the man you're burning at the stake." And then someone came to our cabin. Okay, a Seventh-day Adventist, so cabins, there are hikes, there's a swimming pool. We're, you know, exploring the great outdoors while the adults are inside arguing about theology. But even the adults then would go outside, explore the great outdoors. So this like complete stranger to me, had never met him before. Like, he came to my cabin like he's all upset that my dad was getting kicked out of Seventh-day Adventist church. And he told me he'd pay my way through medical school. So there is that kind of emotional, intense commitment. Seventh-day Adventists have an intense, you know, high commitment religion where they're often very generous with one another. So this complete stranger came up and said he'd pay my way through medical school. But he didn't know what I really needed was like a YouTube boot camp. This was 1980, so he didn't know about YouTube boot camp. So together we make up the complete image of God. Jews and blacks and Chinese and Latinos, we're all making up the complete image of God.